All good? Cool. Right, so I'm Luke, by the way. If you want to tweet at me, it's there and in the corner next to the spaceship. I work at Skybet and Gaming, which is down there. I'm sure you've probably heard of Skybet and Sky Vegas and all that. Some of you work there. Tom's shaking his head. And if you want to follow along with the slides, because you might not be able to read them or something, please go to that URL. It's slides.lukeb.co.uk/leads.org 2018. So, quick show of hands. How many of you have done stuff with React? It's a lot of you. Okay, how many of you have done snapshot testing? Okay, not enough of you. Snapshot testing is fantastic. I really like it. That's why I wrote this talk. So in July 2016, Facebook added snapshot testing to Jest. Jest being their testing framework. It's like the recommended one for doing anything with React. And it's hugely, hugely popular because it makes things really easy. But what is it? It's sort of an ambiguous name. So if you've heard of visual regression testing, you might know it. So it has a website, takes a picture, takes a screenshot, marks it as a good point, and dates it. And then you come along later and take another screenshot and date that, and then you compare the two. And you can see the differences between it. So in this one, it's the picture's changed, and the banner is blue, and the colours have changed on the top. And the test would fail because they're different. And it would show you a diff of why it's failed. And snapshot unit tests are sort of the same for your code. So you write your test, and when you first run that test, it captures the output of the test and then saves it off to one side. And it formats it in a predictable way so that it's always working in that way. And then when you run your test later, it does the same, but it doesn't save it, it compares it to what you have saved. And because they're formatted in the same way, if the output of that code hasn't changed, the test should pass. If it fails, that means something's changed in how the code is output. So it'll fail. And that's where it does the comparison. And again, it'll tell you what's different. It'll say, okay, it says gimme instead of it's good. And it's really, really useful because it means that you can write tests really quickly. You don't have to dig down and figure out how to access certain things in an object. You can just go, okay, this is the snapshot of this object. And you don't have to write loads of assertions for an object again. You don't have to say, does this thing exist? Does this thing exist? Does this thing exist? And when updating the tests, you just run a command on your command line. On Jest, it's just -u, and it'll update your snapshots. And then you just go and look at git diff and see this has changed. So let's have a look at some code. Can people at the back read that? Okay. I'm not sure I can make it any bigger. I'm sorry. I will read things out anyway. So we have a basic React component. What we do is, so we have our import of React, we have component. This is probably quite old. I wrote this talk last year. I haven't updated it since. So we have a basic component that just renders h1 hello. Nice title tag. And then our tests, we pull in React, we pull in our component, we pull in React Test Renderer, which is one of the tools you can use to render out React elements for snapshot testing. And then in your test itself, you tell it, create a renderer with that element. You pass it out to JSON. I don't know why it's called to JSON because it's not really JSON. And then you'd say expect that to match the snapshot. And your snapshot ends up looking like that. It's just the HTML that will be output. And it means that you can then go in when you run your first tests, you can check, does this look like what I'm expecting it to put out? If not, then there's something wrong with your code or your tests or whatever, and you can sort that situation. So that's a fairly simple one. And then if you've got something where it passes props, it's fairly similar. You just have to do your variations whether or not it should take props. So in this one, it's the same component as before, but if it gets passed in the prop name, it'll output the name into the welcome. So it'll either say welcome or welcome Luke. And then your test again, the first test is exactly the same. Second one, it just passes in the prop name. And then your snapshots again, still got the same snapshot where it's outputting h1 welcome, and then the second one is outputting h1 welcome leads. It looks like you expect it to. Commit it, test good. And then if you've got nested React components, so a test shouldn't care about things that are used inside it. It shouldn't have to render every single component and decide that, well, the component I brought in isn't matching anymore, because that should be tested by that component's tests. So we do what's called shallow rendering. So in here I have a header that pulls in the welcome component and passes in a prop, and then has another element just saying now go away again. And then we have a slight difference in our tests. So we pull in our header, and then we also have what's called a shallow renderer. So a shallow renderer renders just one component level deep. It'll show your subcomponents and say that that's where it would be rendered, but it won't actually render the contents of it. So a shallow renderer renders just one component level deep. So we have a test here that again creates your renderer. You render out that element. You have to get the output in this case. I don't know why it's decided to be different for this API, but it has. And then you expect that to match the snapshot. And then because we've got where we pass in props, we want to make sure that they pass. So we have a test down here where we pass a prop of name to the header, and then we can make sure it gets passed through. Again, we check it matches our snapshot. So our snapshots there show what we care about in our test. So where it's got welcome here, that's just showing that the welcome component would be put in there. And it's passing undefined because there's no actual prop data for it. It's just showing that it would be passed. And then our second test, it's showing that we're passing through leads as the name prop, which is we're expecting. Both tests look good. Commit it. We're all happy. And React isn't the only case for doing this. You can do it with any serializable object. So arrays, great use case for it. If you've got a massive long array and you don't want to check every single item in it, you can just check it matches a snapshot. So I have a function here that just reverses some strings because I don't know why. I don't know why I decided that would be the case for this. But in my actual code for it, it only reverses it if it's a string. So, for example, my test, I pass in an array of hello, badger, 2049 as a number, and something else. And then I reverse it, and I should expect everything except 2049 to be reversed. And then in my snapshot, it does exactly what I expect. Hello is turned into Ole, regdab, 2049, and I'm not going to try and say that. But we were probably going to run the test and copy and paste it anyway, and that means that if we made any changes, we'd have to run the test and copy and paste. And this just does it for us. It's nice. It works. And you can even use it for testing API calls. So you make the request to your API, you grab that JSON blob that you've got, and then you just pass it into your test. So you expect what you get from that API to match a snapshot, and then you tell it that the test is done. It's async because it has request in there, so you have to tell it that it's done, otherwise it'll just assume that the test hasn't ever succeeded and will fail. But again, the snapshot is just, like, I return this JSON blob here of my name, my age that's wrong, and leads, and then the JSON blob that has in the snapshot test is exactly the same. I've used this at work for a JSON document that one of our things produces, because I'm not going to dig through a JSON object and decide that everything's valid. It's just, here's a snapshot. I can look at the snapshot because I know what the JSON blob should look like, and then it's committed. And there's a load of other tooling around this stuff. So I mentioned React Test Renderer. You probably won't end up using that because it's really, really basic. There's a great one called Enzyme by Airbnb. I think it's by Airbnb. And it's really good. It's got tons of stuff in it. I ended up starting using React Test Renderer on a project at work, and we moved really quickly away from it because it didn't suit our needs at all. And then there's libraries for doing this stuff with other frameworks, so you don't have to use Jest if you don't like it. There's stuff for Mocha, there's stuff for Tap, there's stuff for all these other frameworks. But it's not a Swiss Army knife. You can't use it for everything. It's great for a lot of things, but it's not fantastic for everything. So interactions you can't test with a snapshot, because a snapshot is getting a point in state and data, whereas an interaction is making sure that an action happens. So you can't fire a click through snapshot testing. It doesn't necessarily work great if there are moving parts. So if there's stuff that changes, it's not fantastic. If it's one item, that's fine. You can just say, okay, I know this thing's going to change. It's semi-unimportant. I can just blank that out. That's fine. But if there's a lot of stuff that changes, that will end up breaking your snapshots because it won't be the same. The other thing is, if you're a TDD person, you can't really do snapshots with TDD. It's not advisable to write snapshots by hand because it's really easy to mess them up. It's not a huge issue for me. I'm not a TDD person. I did do it to fix a bug recently, so you can do it, but I already had the output from previous snapshots and I just needed to delete some stuff. So you can do it in some cases. It can be helpful for that, but it's more likely than not that you're not going to use it for TDD. So I like snapshot testing a lot. It's made me really enthusiastic about testing. The reason I like it so much is because I was writing a build tool for a thing, and it traversed through scripts and mashed them all into one file. And I thought, how the hell do you test that it's output everything properly without going like, does this string match this string? Which would be horrible. Like, if you've got 20 lines of code, you have to then have a string of 20 lines of code in your test, and it'd be horrible. Or pull it in from another file, which is what I originally had it as, which is basically snapshot testing. I then ended up writing a tool to do snapshot testing. I don't use Jest, I use Tap, which is another testing framework. I love it because you can just run the test files as node files and it gives you all the outputs. Fantastic. And it's really easy to debug, unlike some other tools that just swallow everything and never tell you anything. And I couldn't find a snapshot testing tool for Tap, so I spent like a week writing one because I get sidetracked really easily, and then wrote like tests to 100% so that I could make sure that my testing utility had good coverage, because you don't want a testing utility that's not tested, because that would be terrible. So that's everything. Thank you very much. So we do have pizzas at the back. We're going to have a break now. I don't know how warm the pizzas are. But if you've got any questions or anything about snapshot testing or what I've just talked through,